London, I think in terms of your career, Steve, was quite an important move as well. You seem to have an itch for doing things beyond just pressing the shutter, because you got together again with other photographers in London, and out of that sprung another collective of sorts, which was the Network Photography Agency.
Yeah, well, I was doing more national and international work, and I was very lucky in that I think in '79 a magazine opened called Now magazine, and it only ran, I think, for 3 years, '79 to '82, I think it was, and it was a colour news magazine in UK. I mean, there hadn't, okay, there'd been picture posts, black and white, but there hadn't been a magazine running photography. But well, it wasn't a photographic magazine, it was a news magazine, but it ran, good, serious stories, and they used good people, and it was and that started, and I thought, so I went to see them, and initially I started doing stories for them in Wales, because, I still had contact in Wales, and in a way I wasn't competing with London photographers because there were a zillion of them, good. And I did stories like I did the steel strike for them, and I did a couple of other quite big stories, and I started getting used, and they started to realize, okay, he doesn't screw up stuff, we'll start using him. Then they started giving me national jobs, and at that time, like every weekend somewhere in the UK there's a demo. It was Thatcher, it was demos, it was either National Front, Anti-Nazi League. So I used to ring them up and say, there's a demo. So, okay, yeah, go and cover that for us. So I used to do a lot of demos. I got quite good at covering demos. And then they started commissioning me. So they'd say, okay, we've got a story here, can you go? Initially it was UK, and then they started sending me on the international. And the first big job I did was, the news was that Tito was dying. He was gravely ill. He got a few days or weeks left. There was going to be repercussions when he died. They wasn't sure what would happen. So I went to Yugoslavia, and he didn't die, but he was almost dead. And I stayed there for 4 weeks in the hotel, waiting for him to die, basically, and then photographing what they thought something would happen. And that was interesting, because I started to meet, all the world's press was sending photographers, because this was a big story. And I met some really interesting, I met Leonard Freed there, he was working for some American, I met some really interesting photographers that, I never would have met in Cardiff. Anyway, after 4 weeks, he hadn't died. I came back, but then he did die, and they sent me back, and I did cover the funeral. So that was quite interesting. So this was a really lucky break for me, this magazine, because I was able to do, this was all colour, but it was news stories. So I was travelling, I was meeting really, really good photographers I was learning from, and I was doing stuff, getting into really quite interesting situations, which is what, I always wanted to do when I first went to Newport. But I was still even then coming up with ideas. And one idea I wanted to do was Albania. And I read that Albania was an incredibly closed country. You couldn't get in. They didn't allow photographers, didn't allow journalists. Nobody could get in. There's no pictures available of Albania. I couldn't find any. And the guy who ran it was a guy called Enver Hoxha, and he was, so it was very, cruddy socialist, left-wing country. They hated anything Western. So I tried to think, well, how can I get into Albania? Because, this would be good. This story would sell all over the world, really. I found a company in Bristol, actually, that it was a sort of strange travel company that did really weird trips to like Russia. It was very sort of left-wing socialist. They did trips to Russia and places like China that other companies couldn't get in. So I went to see them. I persuaded them that, I was really interested in socialist countries and socialist dogma and all this, which I was actually, I did read up on it, and I was interested in seeing it. You say, how do these people live? It's a bit like North Korea now, I think. How do they live? How do they, do they have cars? Nobody knew, really. So I went with this group of only about 6 people, and we went to Albania. And of course, photography was forbidden, you know. I had to have a shave. You can't have beards in this country. It was a really weird place. But I did take a camera with me, and I took some film, and I managed to get it in. And, you know, we were taken around the country on a bus and, you know, told how wonderful the regime was. And it was a fascinating place. You know, it was really interesting. Everywhere there were pillboxes, all the landscape, there were thousands and thousands, because they thought they were going to be invaded. So they built these pillboxes everywhere. And, you know, people walked around, there was very few, there was a few cars, but very little. And it was a very, very repressed society. But I had to get pictures. So, you know, I started taking sort of under my coat and you know, my bag and all this stuff. And it became apparent that they'd clocked this, you know, that, okay, this guy's a bit strange. So they put a special guy on the bus who was kind of following me. And this guy followed me around everywhere. And I used to try and hide from him. You know, I'd go behind a pillar, wait till he'd go, and then I'd run somewhere else. And I did manage to get, I mean, obviously, you know, I couldn't go anywhere, but I managed to get some really interesting pictures. And I'd photograph through the coach window, but sort of, you know, under my arm and all this kind of stuff. If I did it and they saw me, they'd come up and they'd take the film off me. So what I made sure, I had a lot of empty cassettes, and I'd say, okay, I'd fiddle around, give them the empty cassette, but not give them the real film. And then at the airport to come out, I thought, how am I going to? And they followed us, you know. This guy followed us to the airport and he was talking to these guys, and then they said, okay, we want all your film. We know you've got a camera, we want all your film. Fortunately, I thought this might happen, so I'd given some film to some other people on the group and said, do you mind putting this in your luggage? So I didn't get a lot of film out, but I got perhaps 10 rolls of film. I took it to Now magazine. They said, oh, okay, wow, okay. So they did a really nice spread on Albania. And because it was my idea, my pictures, all my copyright, I could then, what I would do then is make up duplicate sets, duplicate trends, all I'm trying to, I'd make duplicates of transparencies. Because there was no writer, I thought, okay, so I had to write the words, which was, you know, I can do it, but I'm not a writer. You know, it's a real effort for me to write, but I did it. So I could send out pictures and text. It was a package. And so I sent that out to wherever I could, magazines, Stern and Aussie and Perry Match and some in the States, you know. And it was well used. So I thought, okay, this can happen. I can do this. A lot, you know, some of the stories I'd do, and it was disaster. You know, I'd lose money. I thought, okay. But generally, I was sort of surviving.
Amongst those organisations were people, going back to the copyright thing, and you having that kind of control. Was it the norm for organisations and publications to try and have the copyright?
Not so much then, no. You could. Obviously, they had some had staff photographers. Like Now magazine didn't have staff photographers; they're all freelance. But obviously, some of the magazines did have staff photographers, and they did the stories and they took their copyright. And some were, you know, obviously that wasn't a problem to them, and they did it fine. And then there were freelancers who generally didn't do that. But it was easier in the fact, like even the stuff that Now magazine commissioned, or another magazine, or the Reserve or something that commissioned, because you weren't staff, you do this job, you send them the pictures, they would do their edit, run the pictures. They tended to keep what they used, but everything else you got back. Everything. So of course, what I would do then, I'd put stuff into stock. Obviously, I couldn't sell that store in the UK again, because you wouldn't do that. But you could sell it elsewhere, or you could, you know, embellish a story or change it or slightly. But you got those pictures, but they were your pictures.
So when you say you put it into stock,
yeah. Well, okay. Again, this relates to the origins of Newport, because if you have this philosophy that you never give pictures away, you always retain copyright. You have a lot of pictures. You know, it's then obvious that you could put pictures with libraries and they would sell. And there weren't so many libraries then, but there were things like the Telegraph Library, Tony Stone, and there were libraries where you could put pictures and they would sell them, either editorially or they would sell them for advertising or corporate use. So you had a revenue stream from that. And because I'd always done it, I started doing that, and I started capturing pictures, and I would send them out to start with, only in the UK, because I wasn't sending them out. I did eventually send them out everywhere. But then that leads on to network, because a group of us decided, if we had our own library in subjects that we were interested in, then we could control that, and we could become known because we were doing social relevant stories, and therefore socially relevant publications would choose network over maybe somewhere else who didn't have those kind of images. And there wasn't anywhere in the UK doing that. Yes, there were big agencies, big libraries, but not really in the UK. So that's pretty much the nucleus of how network started. A group of 8 photographers who got together and said, okay, we're cooperative, so we had to give a percentage of all our income to network, because we had to have an office, we had to have a picture editor, we had to have some staff.
Can you recall who that founding group of 8 were amongst you?
Yeah.
Got them there?
There's myself, there's Barry Lewis, Mike Goldwater, Judah Passow, Mike Abrahams, the guy who ran it was Neil Slavin, who'd been a picture editor before.
Was Homer in at the beginning?
No, Homer Sykes wasn't in. Homer, I think at that stage, was pretty much did everything on his own. I'm sure he had ties up with. I think he had a tie up with Viva in Paris, because we approached Viva we would represent them in the UK and they represent us in Paris. Viva were very good. Similar thing to us, actually. I think Viva, in their, I don't know if they were cooperative, but they were good young photographers. I think Homer was hooked up with them, but he wasn't. A lot of photographers joined after after me, and I because I moved on before. I don't know all the photographers. I don't think Homer. I'm pretty sure he wasn't a network photographer.
Because certainly the website that's up now, just remembering network and the photographers involved with examples of the work. Your name's not there.
No. Well, okay, that's another story. Yes. Anyway, so
it's frustrating. I'll just say it's frustrating because again, examples of your work aren't up there for other people to see.
Yeah, I know.
But
I was very protective of my work in a way, and I didn't. Yes, it was used in the network library, and then, but I left network, and they didn't like that. Okay. I was the first one that left. Like Barry Lewis has never spoken to me since, but I left for a reason. And I think it was a right reason. I'm glad I left when I did, because what I went on to led me to more things that I never would have done at network. So I'm glad I did. They were a great bunch of photographers, very, very good, support, lovely guys. But I wanted to do other things.
So you stuck it for 2 years, I think, didn't you? 81 to 83? And you went to the Colorific agency, which is an agency I'd never heard of.
I think one of there were a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, I had a problem in Belfast where I got shot. That was
That's a small problem, Steve.
Yeah, that sort of was a trigger, really, to think, hang on, I've got to move in another direction.
So this would have been during the Troubles?
Yes, I went over to cover for Now magazine, but Network was going. I went for Now magazine to cover the Troubles. And whilst I was there, a group of soldiers fired a rubber bullet into a group of us that were standing there, good photographers and women and children, and they shouldn't have done it, but they did, and hit me in the head and fractured my skull, and I had 3 months in hospital and lost all my gear.
So they knew they were shooting into a group of photographers and women and kids?
What it was, we're photographing there'd been some disturbance at Divis Flats on the bottom of the Falls Road, and I was with a couple of other photographers, a French and an English guy, and the squad of soldiers had done what they're doing. They were turning around, they were going back, they were walking away from us, and we were talking to some women and some children. The last soldier in the group, for some reason, turned round, and with a rubber bullet gun, you're supposed to. The rules of engagement are they're supposed to hit the ground. The bullet is supposed to come up and break your legs or hit your legs. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're told to do by the army. This guy, I remember, could see me aimed at the group and fired. And the rubber bullets are not very accurate. They don't, not like a rifle. They but they're big, bloody, big, heavy rubber things. And it hit me in the head. So they took me to hospital and all that stuff. But because he shouldn't have done it, I thought, no, he shouldn't have done that. And then because I was a member of the NUJ, I remember speaking to the guy at the NUJ. I said, look, they shouldn't have done this. And he said, oh, yes, this is terrible. Let's take them to court. Okay, well, I can't take them to court. And they said, okay, we'll fight the case for you. We'll fund the case and we'll take it to court. So it dragged on for a bit, but they said, but you're going to have to get witnesses, and we're going to have to go over to Belfast, and we're going to have to, have a court case. I managed to find the photographer who was next to me, who kind of helped me into the car, and fortunately there was an NBC cameraman who filmed the whole lot for NBC Network.
What, caught the incident?
Caught the incident.
Wow.
Caught them firing, caught me falling over and all this. I tracked him down, 'cause he was based in London, although he was American. Tracked him down and said, look, have you got the footage of this? So he went to the archive. I said, oh, yeah. And he produced a series of stills. And I said, would you be prepared to come to Belfast and, testify in my defence that this happened, the soldiers shouldn't have done this, it was illegal, da-da-da. He said, okay. He wasn't very keen, but he said, okay. So four of us or so, we went over to Belfast, we had the court case, and what transpired was that from these stills, you could tell the soldier's regiment because of the uniform he was wearing. And they'd sent this guy over, this soldier, a young guy, to say basically, yes, it was me, I did it because we were being thrown stones by the kids, we were under... So I did it in defence, which is a total bullshit. But what I could see that the uniform that his regiment had was different to the one in the picture. So the judge eventually said, hang on, this is different. You're not in this regiment. You weren't there, were you? And this poor soldier said, no, sir, I wasn't.
Go.
They'd sent him to be a full guy to do this today, right? So the judge said, okay, throwing this out, we'll award Mr. Benbow £15,000. We're going to take £2,500 off for putting himself in a dangerous situation, for being there.
You naughty boy.
Go away. When they appealed, we had to do the whole thing again. We had to go back, same people. On the steps of the court, they said, okay, here's your money. Bugger off. Anyway, after that, I sort of had to have a break from photography because, I had to get back. I had no cameras because I'd lost all my cameras. I was still in contact with David. It all comes back to David Newport. I was still in contact with him, and he said, oh, that's... At that time, Magnum had a deal with Olympus cameras because a lot of photography... Olympus had some great little cameras called OM1s, OM2s, OM4s.
I had an OM2 spot programme.
Oh, right.
Way back in the day. I loved
They were lovely cameras. He must have spoken with the guy at Olympus, and these cameras arrived. He'd spoken to Olympus and got me new cameras. I mean, that is good, isn't it?
There's a funny, I don't know if you caught the Philip Jones Griffiths exhibition that was over in the National Library in Aberystwyth back in, God, it must have been 2015, 2016, I think. It wasn't long after we started Pfoton. But they had an exhibition of his work, big exhibition, but they had display cases with some of his kit, his camera jackets, but they'd also, one pride of place was a letter from Olympus in the display cabinet saying, we've given you these cameras, Mr. Griffiths, along the lines of this.
Yeah.
There's meant to be a bit of quid pro quo. We'd like some pictures back in return. So he was obviously out there using all the gear, but not giving them the images. It was that kind of arrangement.
They were, because they were very small, and they were quite quiet.
And the lenses were great.
Lenses were good. For most of my reportage stuff was all. Oh, I did have a couple of Leicas.
So what was the gear that you lost in Ireland then? What were you shooting with then?
It's all Olympus.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much all Olympus. Maybe I got one Leica, I can't remember.
So you leave Network and go to the Calorific agency. And
yeah.
They were in London too then, were they?
Yes, they were. They're in London, yeah. They're a small group, but they were run by a guy called Terry Lagubin, who was an ex-photographer himself. He'd worked for Time, I think. Anyway, and his wife Shirley, and she ran the library. So they had a library of images, and Terry would talk to the magazines and try and sell work of the photographers he represented. He represented people like Annie Leibovitz, he represented, and also Contact Press Images in New York. And they were run by a guy called Bob Pledge, and they had some very, very good photographers, David Burnett, Alan Reininger. They had a stable of about 3 or 4 very good photographers. So I would start to see that work coming into the agency. And what Terry did, he let me have a room in the agency where I could edit film, I could caption, I could then put stock into their library, but I could edit pictures and I would give to him to try and market. And he also had a tie-in with libraries and agencies in different countries, France, Germany, Finland, Italy, Spain. So I started learning about these agencies and libraries in European countries mainly, and the States. I started sending my pictures to them, stock pictures, and then if I did a feature story, I would make my edits up and I would send it to them for them to sell in their country. So if I did a story in the UK, I would offer it to the UK publications as first British rights. Then I would send it to different countries, try and get them to sell in their country. And that started to work really well, but it also introduced me to different agencies in different countries. And also, Bob Pledge had a very good relationship with Time magazine, and he used to get commissions all the time for his photographers in New York, to do major stories anywhere in the world. And he started getting me assignments, and I did quite a few jobs for him in London, basically. But then I also did some stories with their photographers. We did one in Chile when it was the anniversary of Allende's assassination by Pinochet. And I went over, I think David Burnett went from Contact and I went over. And we spent about 3 weeks in Santiago photographing the riots and the disturbances they had when all the Allende supporters came on the streets and the army came out. So that was interesting because it was a major world story, photographers from all over the world were there, SIPA, Gamma, Sigma, AFP, Agence France Presse, all were there. So I was meeting these really interesting photographers and learning such a lot from these guys. They were so far more experienced than I ever was. They speak 4 or 5 languages. They were, and this was an interesting world that suddenly opened to me. Wow, this group, and it tended to be the same photographers would go from one world event to another. So you started to know everybody. They were mainly French, but a lot of good Americans. Jim Nackaway was started on the scene for Black Star. And I was learning so much from these people because this was another level for me. And then my stuff would go back to New York. It would be edited and sold. But because I was on a day rate from Time magazine, I was getting good money, and I was learning, and I was doing stories I was really interested in. I was really interested in Chile and its history and Allende and all that. So for me, it was like a win-win. And and again, because all the pictures came back, I was getting good stock as well. So my stock was going out to, a lot of places. So then I thought I'd like to live in New York. I could learn a lot here, and it would be a new experience. I'd learn a lot. By which time, Kate was working as a picture editor for Colorific. So I said, why don't we go and you can try and pick up some work in the agencies, in the libraries, and I will work as a freelance photographer, and I'll try and use Contact to help me. So we went, and Kate got work at Magnum and Woodving Camp and a few other places. So again, we started meeting their photographers. We met, we met quite a few of the photographers there that was working. We met Philip Jones Griffiths and his partner. We became reasonably friendly with them. So I was learning a lot from that as well. So I started working in New York, but I was also, because I had contacts in London, I was getting assignments from London, from the Sunday Times, and I had some nice jobs from then. I did, I was trying to remember some of the jobs I did. I did spend time with Yul Brynner, I did. And also they were sending me abroad to do jobs as well, out of New York, which was interesting. because again I was learning a lot from that.
How did the local rabble of photographers then in New York treat you? I'm guessing you weren't getting the same pushback that you got in Cardiff of Cardiff.
Oh,
the MUJ thinking you were some kind of threat.
It was a different world. I mean, there's
professionals.
It's so professional. They're so good. The markets are so good. The editors are so good. If you weren't any good, you didn't even survive at all. But it's like anything. The best people are the most generous because they're confident in their own skins. They don't have to bullshit. It's the people who aren't good, who think they're good, that you get problems with. But the top, it's like the top photographers, the top people. They are so generous in their help because you're no competition to them. You're never going to be as good as they. I was never going to be as good as they were. But I didn't care. I was learning, and I was. For me, it was an incredible experience, and I love New York. I love living there, and so we had some.
Any big highlights in terms of the big stories, and any covers and things that you were getting?
Yeah, I was getting covers. I did a lovely story on Leonard Bernstein. I spent time with him. He was lovely. I was starting to get spreads and covers, and it was really going quite well. Yeah, so I love New York.
When did you have the Gorbachev cover then?
Sorry, that was before I went to New York because Gorbachev came over to the UK. I had a call from. I had started to go to New York and seeing picture editors, so they knew me. This was before that, and when Gorbachev came over for a state visit to the UK, they called up and said, "Can you cover him in London?" Not just me; they had other photographers come, but I was one of the gaggle, and we followed him up to Scotland and so I did a lot of shots of him. And at the end of that visit, they ran a story on Gorbachev, and I did get the cover, which was my one and only Time cover. So I didn't know, Time magazine knew me at a kind of lower level, which meant I could ring them up and say, "I'm going somewhere. Are you interested?" I say, "Well, yeah, we're interested. You can use our name, but we're not going to commission you." And the beauty of Time magazine, it opened every door imaginable. I mean, anywhere you went, I'm for Time. "Oh, come in. Can we help you?" That was incredible. And obviously I started to meet their staff photographers. I think Peter Jordan was their guy in London, and I remember talking to one Time photographer on a job, and we were talking about the differences between a staff photographer and a freelance. And obviously, the staff photographers, they've got certain advantages, but they give their pictures, have to give their copyright away. And so we were talking about, what's the best at and he said, "Well, my decision was." I sold my soul to Time magazine, and they gave me the world, and that was his attitude. It was fine. He got incredible lifestyle, went to incredible places, took incredible pictures, and got well paid. I mean, that's good.
But no archive.
But then, it's a trade-off, isn't it? He was getting the security, the jobs, the money. Because with freelancing, you made money, but you could lose money. So. You certainly weren't becoming rich being a freelance editorial photographer.
No, but what an experience, though.
Yeah, but a lot of it, even the reportage people were doing corporate work to finance their editorial work, which gave them more freedom. But and a lot of photographers wouldn't tell you that. Even the big names, you'd see their books and you'd say, "These are wonderful. How does this guy? He doesn't do it all the time. He shoots corporate reports, for like 10,000 a day or whatever they do." You started to learn that, so okay, I can see it's not all it seems. There's things going on underneath that. As you start learning more, you start, photography is not as it seems.
So going back to those early days when you graduated or came out of that course at Newport, was corporate work, was there a heady market for it then in Wales, in the UK?
I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about corporate work. I didn't know what they did. I mean, I knew there were such things as studio photographers who shot products, fashion, but I didn't know any. I didn't know anything about it, and there was nothing. I wasn't interested in it because I didn't want to be stuck in a studio or photographing bars of soap or whatever. I wanted to be out in the real world, so it didn't interest me.
It's an interesting area, though, isn't it? Because there's still a need and a demand for it. Because companies will do the annual reports.
Well, I got into it. I became a corporate photographer. So, I learnt about it, but at that stage, I didn't know anything about it.
So, New York, but then you pinged back to Paris then, I think.
Well, okay, whilst I was in New York, and in fact, this has started in London. I started working for a magazine called US News and World Report, based in Washington. And that was like Time magazine, but it wasn't quite as well known outside the US, and it wasn't kind of international, but it was very, very connected with Washington, the government, and it had very, very good contacts with that. But they did news stories, they did features, they did personalities. So I started working for them. When we were in New York, I started doing more work for them. So we decided to go to Washington, base ourselves in Washington for a few months and do more work for them, and starting to get... I knew the picture editor quite well, John Achave. And I said, if we came down for a few months, could I get some jobbing work around, do some stuff on the Capitol Hill and that kind of thing, which I was interested in. I wanted to learn more. He says, yeah, sure, come round. So we went down to Washington, rented a place, and I'd go into the darkroom, talk to their photographers, then they'd take me up into the Capitol building, and we'd all, you see picture of them crawling around on the floor in front of the committee. So I was doing all that. I thought, oh, this is interesting. I wouldn't want to do it all the time. But then I thought, okay, I'd quite like to go back to Europe now. I've had enough of this. So I thought, I tried to convince the picture editor, look, I know you've got an office in Paris, but you don't have a photographer in Paris. You've got a journalist. Why don't you let me and Kate base ourselves in Paris? I will cover Europe and Africa and Middle East for you. Kate can be your picture editor. They said, oh, okay, let's go and have a Chinese meal. Eventually, we hung around, and they said yes. Okay, this is good. So we went to Paris. We found their office. We met the secretary. It was a lovely, lovely woman who it was kind of connected to some French nobility somewhere. A lovely woman. There was a journalist there who we were convinced was Mossad. Strange guy. Anyway, so we started working. Kate started editing, pulling in pictures from Europe, and I started working for them. And we did that for over a year. The big story we did for them was the Gorbachev summit in Geneva. They had this summit where they were talking about limiting nuclear weapons, etc. So, in fact, the picture editor from Washington came over because this was a big story for them. Kate went over and I went over. So we covered the conference, and because US News had such intro into, the powerful people, they managed to get an exclusive of Gorbachev and Reagan in one of their bedrooms talking, just the two of them, one-on-one. They got exclusive. We had an exclusive there. Nobody else was there, so we did the pictures. So we had these really exclusive pictures, and they said, we've got to get it back quick to Washington for the deadline. We've got to beat Time and Newsweek to do this. So we gave the pictures to Kate. She took the plane to Paris. They put her on Concorde to fly to New York, then to Washington, to physically give them the darkroom. Here's the pictures. Don't screw them up. And they got a real exclusive of that summit. So again, that was something that really opened my eyes to how these things work and how you can do it. And if you wanted to do it all the time, this is what you'd have to do. You'd have to do this type of stuff, which is not what I wanted to do. But I'm glad I did it because I learned an awful lot from that. And it was fun, it was exciting, it was interesting. I met some wonderful people.
What do you think was the biggest thing you learned from that experience? Was it the exclusivity? Was it the way you got in?
I think what I learned was there's another world. Mm-hmm. Photography operates on different levels, and it changes as you not necessarily go up, but as you change a different level. So it's possible if you know what all those levels are, and you know what it's like to work at those levels, you can choose what you want to do. If you want to photograph, one subject for the rest of your life and produce little, fine, books, you can do that. This is how you do it. If you want to do this, you can do it. This is how you do it. If you want to do this, you can do it. I know how to do that. So it gave me options of what I wanted to do because I'd learned all those different genres of how it works. But you can't explain that to anybody unless they've gone through it. You know, if you want to be a famous photographer in a particular field, okay, but you do this, you know, you cover one aspect until you're so famous, you can do other things on the back of that. And I started to realise, hang on, you know, there's things going on here that I wasn't totally aware of when I started. And things you're not told. Some people, they don't tell you because they don't want to tell you.
Yeah.
You know, there's that going on as well.
Pulling the ladder up behind them.
Absolutely. But the thing that came through is that the best of the best. And, you know, people are at the top of a certain thing because, A, they do it for a long time. That's the other thing about photography. If you do something long enough, you become good at it. But the best people will rise to the top at any type of photography they do. I learned that as well, which is a bit obvious, really. But that's what it is. So, yeah, you know, it's just a wonderful learning experience, really.
So from Paris then, I think we're around about 1986, you come back to London.
Yeah. We decided, what happened? When we were in Paris, Kate got a call and they said, do you want to be picture editor on the London Times? So we knew we were coming back to London. You know, I needed to get some work. We needed to get some money. So she agreed to that. She came back, started working, and I stayed on a bit to finish off my contract, etc. And I remember calling her up and saying, how is it going? And she said, well, it's horrible. I'm trying to get to work and they're throwing stones at me at the coach and the car. What? What I didn't realise, and because we were out of the UK, you know, I'd lost contact with what was going on. The Times had moved to Wapping, right? This was the big digital switch over. And there was all this problem with, you know, the unions were saying, you know, and they were picketing the entrance to the Times at Wapping, and this poor staff had to go through run this gauntlet of, and it was terrible. You know, one woman got, I think, punched in the face coming off a bus. You know, it was really horrible.
It was big at the time, wasn't it, on TV and what have you?
Yeah, it was massive over here, because I was unaware of it because I wasn't living here. Anyway, so I came back to London, and we lived then by the Elephant and Castle. So Kate was picture editor at the time, not the picture editor, but a picture editor on the Times. And she was starting to commission photographers, you know, some I knew and they were friends and all this. So that was going well. And I thought, well, what do I do now? I don't want to go back into doing the stuff I've been doing. I'd like to do something else. And as you say, the colour supplements were starting to become more, you know, more of the newspapers were doing colour supplements. And at that time, they were doing quite, you know, some quite serious stories. It wasn't all consumerism as it developed in. It was, you know, they were doing some really nice features on people and stories. So I started going around to see the picture editors, and some of them I knew because I'd worked. The thing about picture editors, if they move to another publication, the photographers tend to follow. And I knew Chris Angeliglu, I knew June Stanier, that I'd worked with before Now Magazine and Sunday Times newspaper. And they were picture editors of some of these colour supplements. So I went to see them and said, okay, oh yeah, what are you going to do? And they started commissioning me. And this was like feature work. This was colour feature. It wasn't news, but it was a feature on a subject, a place, a person. So I started working for The Observer, a bit for the Sunday Times, not a lot. Express Magazine. I did a lot for Mail on Sunday Magazine. And I did some nice jobs. I did things like I did the World Surfing Championships in Hawaii. I spent a week with George Melly, fly fishing in Wales. I did Charles and Diana's wedding. Dudley Moore. I did the fall of the Berlin Wall as well. I did things like the Fastnet yacht race. You know, really weird stuff that. But it was, you know, it was new stuff, and it was colour, and it was fun, and it was enjoyable. And then Kate, of course, she was a picture editor on the Times, so bless her, she gave me a couple of nice jobs. I remember one to photograph the vineyards in Bordeaux with their Times wine writer, you know, and I'm quite into red wine. So that was like, you know, 2 weeks going around the vineyards in Bordeaux.
You poor sod.
Someone's got to do it. I did, you know, skiing jobs I don't ski, that was interesting. But also, I started a project. I wanted to have a personal project. So I went to see the PR head of press at Metropolitan Police, and I started a 12-month project on documenting the Metropolitan Police. And I did all we broke it down to the various aspects of police, like the PR-17, the firearms squad, and the helicopters division and all that. And I photographed the different divisions of the police and their drug squad and all that. And this was like my personal project then, that wasn't destined for any kind of... It was too big for like a magazine feature. Good for stock. So I was getting stock of the police, which is not, it's not easy to get. I mean, obviously some pictures, I had to be careful with. But I thought this is going to be good stock as well, because not that easy to get. Inside pictures, you get, police and all that. Mm. And that was interesting. I got into some very interesting...
What do you think they agreed to? So Metropolitan Police...
Yeah.
You getting material for stock.
Yeah.
What did they understand you were shooting and why?
Well, I didn't shoot it as a stock project. I wanted to document the police.
Right, giving you that access.
Yeah, and I said, it could be used in various things, magazine articles, books. It's showing the Metropolitan Police at work. It wasn't a hatchet job. I wasn't going to show that these are all bloody not doing what they're supposed to do. That was never an intention. I was just interested in what they do, because they have some very interesting things they do. And like the helicopter division was really interesting. How they police by helicopter. That's fascinating. The firearms squad, I did photograph their training, where they have this special place where they go and learn how to be a firearms officer. I mean, you don't walk into those places,
I wonder if their PR department would give that kind of access today.
I don't know. You'd either have to be an incredible name, or you'd have to have something behind you. I didn't have any commission. It was just kind of persuading the guy that I was trustworthy and I would do a good job. I obviously said, look, you may be able to use some of these pictures as well. So it was kind of... There's a bit of benefit for them, because they hadn't got a photographer doing that kind of thing. They had police photographers, but not really what I wanted to do.
Yeah, but with so many scandals in recent years, I think
I don't
if anything, they need good PR, don't they?
Well, also, the officers themselves wouldn't let you do it. I mean, they gave me a band which says police on, and I'd go out on 999 calls. I can't imagine. You'd have to... A police photographer could do it, but I'm not sure a civilian could do it. So that was another personal thing I did. So I did that for a few years, and that, but that was also good for stock, because the stock I did. I mean, people like some of the personalities I did, like Lenny Henry and some really nice people. Of course, I had all the pictures back. I could put those with libraries, so they started selling. So again, my stock library was building up, and it was becoming perhaps a third of my income.
What was in your head then, Steve? Were you thinking this, because this word keeps coming up on stock, but were you thinking pension? That's my pension plan, my photography as stock. Or are you thinking exploiting it now in the commercial world? Were you thinking then, I'm going to be using it? I tend not to think of... I never actually thought of pensions, because I never thought I'd kind of retire in a way. Weird at that stage, because I just felt it was money coming in that I could spend. It would give me money to do a story, it was
to travel. It was my job. So it was like somebody paying me. It wasn't coming from a magazine, it was coming from an agency, but it was money that I could use to live, to work. That's how I saw it. And because I wasn't getting the benefits of a staff photographer, I wasn't getting a car, I wasn't getting pension, and the other thing, I wasn't getting insurance. Now that's a big deal when you're doing iffy jobs. It's okay if you're with the Beeb or Sunday Times or something, but if you're on your own, nobody's going to come fly a helicopter out and get you out of trouble. And to get insurance to go in a war zone is not cheap, and also now you can't even do it now, because you have to go on these courses to learn you have to wear the right helmet, the right gear, and otherwise they won't even let you in. No, I never did anything like that. I turned up in my normal jeans and t-shirt and never had a helmet or anything. So everything's changed now, but of course, where you have to, because things have changed and people are responsible. If you go out and get shot and you're working for Time magazine, there's a responsibility for them, and they will do what they can to help you. And most newspapers will do that. If you're a freelance, tough. And unless you're with a good agency that will help you, like Magnum or some of the bigger ones that obviously, if a photographer's in trouble, they're not going to leave them there. They're going to help them. And Network did that, and Colorific, or one of the big ones, would have
Had
done
your
that.
back, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was, it was important to be, at least have some tie-up, to be totally freelance and be absolutely independent. I mean, some photographers do it, but they've either got sort of a wife who sits at home and she does everything, or they've got an assistant who does everything. So I know some photographers who do that. They can make more money because they're not giving a percentage to the libraries. But I don't think there's many. Maybe there are.
Well, that's an interesting segue into what you did next then. So we're in about 1990, we're into the early 90s now, and Cardiff, you're back here, or doing work here, and you're moving into corporate. Because that field, whether you're an agency, a company, or an individual working in corporate, you need that public liability insurance.
Yeah.
For many clients now will even touch you or let you get a sniff at a contract.
Yeah.
You need to be covered in that. So
yeah.
that switch then from war zones and kind of dignitaries and what have you, you're now thinking, what, commercial? You're thinking corporate photography.
I think by then, it got to a stage where, okay, I've done enough of this to know what it'd be like to do it all the time. And I made a decision, I want to move on. I get quite restless when I think, if I do it, it'll be the same thing in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I want to do something else. I want to learn something. I want to move on. So the only way to do it was to stop doing what I'm doing and have a clean break and move on. And by that time, our daughter came along, and I'd had enough of London. I never liked London. I'm not a Londoner. I always felt in my depth in London, and I always felt an outsider. The London photographers, they had a lot of advantages I didn't have. So I thought, let's go out of London and let's do something else. And we didn't really want to bring our daughter up in London, to be honest. So Wales, Cardiff was the obvious place to go, because at least I knew some of it. I still got some contacts there. I knew some friends there. So we bought a little cottage in a place called Gwaelod-y-Garth, which is just out of Cardiff. And I thought, okay, the only way I can make money really is to be a corporate photographer. So obviously the gear I'd got wasn't going to work, 35mm and all that. So I got medium format Hasselblads, I got lights, I got all the things you need. I got a Land Rover stuff to carry it all. And started touting myself. I did a folio. Started touting myself as a corporate photographer. And you really have to work through design agencies then, because they get the work for the clients and they commission the photography. So that's how it works. Although you can sometimes work direct with a company, a lot of the work comes through agencies, ad agencies or design agencies. So I started going to see them. I was lucky, really. The first job I had, the first good job, was with an agency called Peter Gill Associates, and I vaguely knew Peter. And the WDA then was going, the Welsh Development Agency, and they were the main people with money, and they supported Welsh industry, etc. And they were, keen to promote what they were doing. And it was a good source of work, because obviously they needed images to show what they were doing. And they had commissioned Peter to do a book on inward investment, where foreign, mainly Japanese, were coming to Wales, and that was their policy, to encourage inward investment to help Welsh finance. So I said they wanted a book of colour, images and text to show the companies that were in, like Sony, and what they were doing. Anyway, so Peter commissioned me to be the photographer to shoot the pictures for this. So we spent a few months going round to these companies, photographing the CEO, the workforce, the production line, all this. And that was a lovely job, because it was colour. It was, I didn't have to produce a particular picture, so I was quite free to do what I wanted. But I could start playing around with, okay, how do I use lighting more? I need an assistant, so I get an assistant, a friend, a photographer friend, actually a ex-Newport guy. He was lovely. And he had some technical knowledge, which I didn't have, you know. So I could say, you know, how do I get this light? And I had to get things like light meters, filters, gels, all this kind of crap. But I had to learn it because I'd never done it. We didn't do that in Newport, you know, and I'd never gone to technical courses. But gradually I learned on the job, as I did when I first started. And of course I made mistakes, and then I started, and they produced a lovely hardback book on inward investment in Wales. And this was a good calling card, because I could then go around to other areas and say, look, you know, I've done this, aren't I good? And, you know, some of them gradually started to give me work, and I started to do work. I got all the photography for all the brochures for Cardiff University at that time. And they did about a brochure for each department. There were about 30 departments, full of pictures. So I'd go around all the departments, photographing with my lights and my Hasselblad and my assistants, and that was a good...
That's a nice gig.
It's a lovely gig, because I get every year. Or not every year, but they keep going. I did things like the WDA's annual report for several years. Now, that was like 6 weeks' work on a very good day rate. I mean, that was, you know, a lot of money. I'd never made so much money. And I was keeping all the pictures. And that was the other thing. I wouldn't give them the copyright.
That's interesting.
And I lost, you know, a lot of work I couldn't do because I wouldn't give them the pictures. And, you know, I had arguments with them and some, you know, but I wouldn't do it. I'd say, no, I'm not doing it. I want the pictures. Because I wasn't working directly with any government agency at that, you know, I avoided them because and they're going to want Crown copyright. I don't want to do that. So I tended to try and do jobs where they'd hire me in as a job in photography. I do think, but I want copyright. So those pictures, I thought, okay, that'd be good for one day in the library. And they were good, like, you know, inside of Sony production. How many people have got that? You know. And Sony didn't really care because they had the pictures. You know, I wasn't going to sell them to anybody that was kind of, you know, they didn't want them to. So I was careful. I wasn't stupid. It's about where the pictures went or what the captions were. And pictures that I thought, no, I can't do that. I wouldn't do. I wouldn't. You know, I would kind of sit on them or something, obviously. So I was a bit careful in that respect. But the more generic ones, you know, I thought, you know, this might work as stock. So I did a lot of annual reports. I did...
Were you sending helicopters up, getting aerial stills and things as well as part of those commissions?
Well, yeah, we did some aerial stuff, yeah. I'd hire, yes. I started learning how you could hire helicopters from the heliport in Cardiff and do those kind of things.
Were they using their own gimbals, or were you straddling the open door with a camera?
What was it? It was in Cardiff Bay, wasn't it? I forget what they're called there.
Because I used them a couple of times for film.
Yeah, they were down by. I can't remember. No, I used to hang out the door. They used to give me like a strap.
Yeah.
The big problem I was worried about dropping the Hasselblad over Cardiff. Oh dear. No, but I made sure I was tied down. Yeah. But I could get out. Oh, it had to be a helicopter that, you know, they could take the door off. And they did have some where you could do that. Yeah, we did some of that. We did some adverts for Kodak. I remember using our daughter as a model. We did not quite a few. We did a few for that. I did a bit of work for the Welsh Tourist Board, commission work. But again, I gave them what they wanted, but I kept all the stock.